Welcome back, everybody, to the #1 television show in the history of the universe. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, and The Lonesome Crown, all three books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today I'm going to be reviewing Revival by Stephen King. Now, we are reviewing on my channel every single Stephen King book in order of publication. We are all the way to Revival right now. So we're quite a ways into all of the Stephen King books. Gosh, we're almost near the end, to be honest with you. Now, I've also been listening to the audible.com versions of these books. The voice narrator on Audible for this book was David Morse. Did a good job. I listened to this book on a long road trip I just took. It was about 4 hours one way and 4 hours back. It was the perfect amount of time to listen to this book all the way through with the speed, not at normal speed. I sped it up. On Audible, I sped it up to like 1.75 or something like that. So it was a great listen. Made the ride enjoyable, and I liked the book. Let's talk about the covers first. We always talk about the covers because I love graphic design and cover illustration. This is the original hardcover. This is a little paperback they did. I like the hardcover one better. It's got the lightning strike, the bolt of lightning. It's glossy. It shimmers and shines. This one's just a little boring. Although this one does have this one has no photo of the author. This one has a really cool photo of Stephen King with his guitar, which makes sense considering some of the themes in this book, why Stephen King would pose with his guitar there. Anyway, let's talk about the book itself. This is what I would consider to be Stephen King's most John Irving-esque novel that he's ever written. And John Irving writes these sort of epic sagas, these epic family sagas that span not generations, but they'll usually span for the length of someone's life, from the time they're a teenager until they grow old. This one does the same. In Revival, we get to follow Jamie Morton's life from the 1960s all the way up until now. From when he was a boy up until now. And so we get like this coming of age tale in the 60s and the early, when he's a young boy, a coming of age tale, his early life in the 60s, and then as he gets to in his teenage and college years in the 1970s, we get to kind of a coming of age tale. And then as he kind of grows older and gets wiser and has more experiences in the 90s and early 2000s, things like that, we just see this this kind of like, it's not an adventure really, but just this guy's life through the eyes of him and some other characters, mainly of which is Jacobs, the preacher. So this book gives us a lot of nods to other Stephen King works. All the Stephen King novels are sort of interconnected. This one does the same thing. It specifically gives quite a few nods to the short novel Joyland. There's themes of death and God and belief and faith and fairness. Is the world really a fair place? If there's a God, why isn't it a fair place? Kind of a thing. These are sort of the themes we're talking about. That's about mystery, healing, revival, reincarnation, bringing people back from the dead, healing, and above all, the power and wonder and mystery, supernatural mystery of lightning. And Stephen King's love of music. Those are sort of all the things encapsulated in this story as we journey with Jamie Morton throughout his life. So, what happens? Well, it's also not like that. It's just also kind of like I mentioned lightning. So this also not only does it remind me of John Irving, it reminds me of a book I read called All the Light You Cannot See, which was a World War II novel about the power of electricity also. And this kind of, I don't know why I compared the two a little bit, but that book was All the Light You Cannot See was written by Anthony Dwyer, and it won the Pulitzer Prize. And I think the parallels I draw are just some of the characters' fascination with electricity, lightning, things like that. And, you know. So anyway, Jamie, our main character, as a boy, he becomes friends with the local town preacher, and the local town preacher is Jacobs. And Jacobs moves in to the town, and he's a young, very young, charismatic young preacher. Everybody loves I mean, the people just start going to church again because this guy's just very charismatic, and he's got a young family. He's got a wife and a young kid, and things happen. Tragic things happen in both Jamie's life and in this young preacher's life. And both characters have to come to terms with a lot of the themes I've talked about. Why are things so unfair? I was doing everything in my life correctly, and yet I'm suffering these tragic events, things that just seem like they're unfair. Is God like really looking out for me? Is there even a God? Why do we even try? And these are the themes that sort of follow these two characters throughout this adventure story, as they sort of cross paths over and over again throughout Jamie's life. Because the preacher ends up, you know, moving out of the town, and Jamie goes to college. He joins rock and roll bands. He's got these dreams to be a musician, and this is where Stephen King's love of music really shines through. Because, you know, Stephen King's in a band of his own, and so, you know, he kind of really shows you what it's like to be sort of a struggling musician, having those dreams. Also, this book is a lot about the use of illicit drugs, cocaine, heroin. And I think Stephen King is kind of exercising a lot of his own demons by writing this story about this character who's a musician with dreams that gets hooked on these drugs and sort of kind of fucks up his life that way. And I think Stephen King can write from a perspective of knowing what that's like, even though Stephen King didn't really mess up his life to any degree. I mean, but he certainly knew what it was like to be a drug addict. I'll be honest, the drug addict portions of this book, I've never done an illegal drug in my life. I've never been addicted to any of that stuff. I cannot relate to it at all. So I just was kind of, my eyes were sort of glazing over. During those conversations, when the characters were having conversations about that subject, I just was like not interested. But when the characters were having discussions about grief and loss and how faith is nonsensical, and the thing is these characters, they don't just lose their faith multiple times and regain it back. It's all kind of like a roller coaster for them. Death, and it really does deal with death, the sudden loss of people's faith. So anyway, as they're going through their lives, Jamie meets up with this Reverend Jacob several times, and the second time he meets up with him, I'm not going to get into too many details, but he's not a reverend anymore, but he's still using his charismatic skills. This Jacobs, the former reverend, is still using his charismatic skills, but more as a carnival sort of con man. And this con that he's running at the carnivals involves photography, electricity, lightning, and he just sort of like makes his money that way, just kind of with just these magic effects that he's created at this carnival out of electricity, because he's very obsessed with electricity. This reverend, there's a double meaning. I mean, revival doesn't just mean. I mean, you type in revival into your Webster's dictionary, it's going to have a lot of different meanings, that word, and Stephen King really plays off of every single meaning of the word. And I really kind of enjoyed that aspect of it. Is this a horror novel per se? No. Is it a supernatural thriller? No. Is it action and adventure packed? No. It's just more of like sort of a gee whiz kind of a story about these two characters and slight supernatural events, but that can almost be scientifically explained, and how people deal with God and religion in trying times. One of my I actually really quite liked this a lot. This first time I read it, I don't quite think I grasped the thematic elements that Stephen King was trying to portray as much as I did this time, and I think I really, really appreciated it more this time. But certainly a solid 9 out of 10. Just another great addition to the Stephen King library of books, and we'll see you next time.